The ancient clearing pulsed with anticipation as the pack gathered beneath the crimson moon. Torches flickered around the ceremonial circle, casting long shadows that danced across the faces of onlookers. Tonight was sacred. The marking ceremony happened only when the blood moon reached its zenith, bathing the forest in its ruby glow once every 7 years. Raiden stood at the center, his powerful frame silhouetted against the firelight. As the pack's strongest alpha in 3 generations, his shoulders carried both privilege and expectation. His dark hair was pulled back in the traditional warrior's knot, revealing the sharp angles of his face and the intensity in his amber eyes. The ceremonial markings painted across his bare chest told the story of his lineage. 15 unbroken generations of alpha bloodline. Across from him waited Li, daughter of the pack's beta. Her golden hair cascaded down her back, adorned with white flowers and silver threads that caught the moonlight. She was everything an alpha's mate should be. Strong, beautiful, politically advantageous. The match had been arranged since they were children. A perfect union to strengthen the pack's bloodline. Elder Thorn stepped forward, his weathered hands raising a ceremonial blade. Under the witness of the blood moon, we gathered to bind alpha and mate in the sacred tradition of our ancestors. His voice carried through the clearing, ancient and powerful. When the alpha's mark is placed, 2 souls become one, 2 fates intertwined until death and beyond. The crowd murmured their approval. Parents lifted children to see better. Warriors stood straighter, honoring their leader's milestone. Only one figure remained still and silent at the edge of the gathering Arwen, wrapped in a simple gray cloak that seemed to blend with the shadows as the pack's only Omega. Arwen existed on the periphery of their society. Omegas were rare, often viewed with suspicion, neither alpha nor beta. They belonged to a third designation that many packs had eliminated through selective breeding. Some whispered that Omegas carried old magic, dangerous and unpredictable. Others simply saw them as weak links in the pack hierarchy. Arwen had learned to make herself invisible, to speak only when spoken to keep her eyes lowered when alphas passed. Tonight, she stood in the shadows, as she always did, watching the ceremony with an unreadable expression in her pale blue eyes. Elder Thorn continued the ritual, his voice rising with the ancient words. Blood of the pack, strength of the wolf, bind these 2 as the ancestors decree. Raiden stepped forward, taking Lyria's outstretched wrist in his hand. The ceremonial mark would be placed there first, a bite that would leave his unique signature in her skin, visible to all who might challenge his claim. Later, in private, he would place the true mating mark at the junction of her neck and shoulder. Completing the bond, the crowd fell silent as Raiden lowered his head. His canines lengthened, sharpening as his wolf rose closer to the surface. This was the moment the pack had waited for, their alpha claiming his mate, ensuring another generation of strong leadership. But as his fangs grazed Lyria's skin, something shifted in the air. A strange wind swept through the clearing, extinguishing half the torches and sending a collective shiver through the gathered wolves. The blood moon seemed to pulse overhead, its light intensifying to an almost painful brightness. Raiden felt a burning sensation travel up his arm, across his chest, and down to his core. His fangs pierced skin, but the connection felt wrong, distant somehow, as though he were marking through a veil. A blinding flash of light erupted between him and Lyria, forcing them apart. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Elder Thorn stumbled backward, his ceremonial staff clattering to the ground. Warriors moved protectively toward their families as confusion spread. And then, impossibly, Arwen stepped forward from the shadows. Her gray cloak fell away, revealing simple clothes that couldn't hide the ethereal glow emanating from beneath her skin. Her eyes, normally a pale blue, now shimmered with an inner light that shifted between silver and violet colors. No wolf's eyes should be. What is happening? Lyria demanded, clutching her unmarked wrist to her chest. Elder Thorn, what is this interruption? But the elder stood frozen, his ancient eyes wide with recognition and fear. The Omega Light, he whispered. The forbidden power. Raiden felt it then, a pull in his chest. A tether that hadn't existed moments before. His eyes locked with Arwen's, and he saw the impossible. A marking sigil, his marking sigil, materializing on her wrist, instead of Lyria's. The intricate pattern of lines and curves that was uniquely his. The mark that should have bound him to his chosen mate, now blazed on the skin of the pack's forgotten Omega. Panic tightened his chest as understanding dawned. Somehow, impossibly, the mark had transferred or been redirected. Such a thing was unheard of. A violation of every natural law their kind lived by. You marked me," Arwen said softly, her voice almost a chant, carrying a resonance that seemed to vibrate through the clearing. By mistake, or perhaps by fate. The forest seemed to hold its breath. No one moved. No one spoke. The implications were too severe, too world-altering to process in an instant. Raiden found his voice, though it emerged as a growl. "This is impossible. The mark cannot transfer. It cannot be stolen." "I stole nothing," Arwen replied, her voice still eerily calm. She held up her wrist, where his mark pulsed with golden light. "The mark chose where it belonged." Lyria's father pushed through the crowd, his beta status giving him the right to approach. "This is an abomination. An Omega cannot be marked by an Alpha, especially not the pack leader. It upsets the natural order." Murmurs of agreement spread through the gathering. Some wolves began to shift partially, their eyes glowing and claws extending in response to the perceived threat. Elder Thorn finally recovered his composure, raising his hands for silence. "There are legends," he said hesitantly. "Ancient stories of marks finding their true destination, despite the intentions of those who bestow them. But such things belong to the old magic. Before we civilized our ways." "Remove it," Raiden demanded, stepping toward Arwen. "Whatever trick you've played, whatever magic you've used, undo it now." But as he approached her, the mark on her wrist flared brighter, and an answering burn spread across his chest. He stopped, suddenly unable to move closer, as though an invisible barrier separated them. "The mark cannot be undone," Arwen said, and for the first time, a hint of uncertainty crept into her voice. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't want this." "Lies," Lyria shouted, tears of humiliation streaming down her face. "She's coveted your position for years, Raiden. The jealous Omega, always watching from the shadows." The accusation hung in the air, but something in Raiden's instincts rebelled against it. Arwen had never shown interest in pack politics or status. She had always been the quiet one, the healer who tended wounds without complaint, who slipped away from gatherings as soon as propriety allowed. "The ceremony is suspended," Elder Thorn announced, his voice cutting through the growing tension. "All will return to their homes until the council can convene and determine how to proceed with this unprecedented situation." The crowd began to disperse, reluctantly, whispers and worried glances following Arwen as she stood, still glowing faintly in the moonlight. Raiden felt the eyes of his pack on him, questioning, concerned, some even fearful. An alpha without a proper mate was vulnerable. An alpha bound to an Omega was unheard of. As the clearing emptied, Raiden found himself unable to leave, the new bond tugging at him to remain near Arwen. She finally looked directly at him, and in her eyes he saw not triumph or manipulation, but confusion and something deeper, a knowledge that seemed ancient and new all at once. "What have you done to me?" he asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Arwen shook her head slowly. "I've done nothing, but something has been done to us both." She looked up at the blood moon, still hanging heavy and red above them. "And I fear this is only the beginning." Night fell like a curtain over the packlands, bringing with it a silence heavier than any Raiden had known. He paced the confines of his cabin, a magnificent structure befitting the Alpha status, though it now felt like a prison. The council had been in emergency session for hours, elders and higher-ranking pack members debating what to do about the unprecedented marking. Raiden had been ordered to isolate himself from Arwen, from everyone until a decision could be reached. But isolation couldn't sever the new awareness that hummed beneath his skin. With every passing hour, the connection grew stronger, a golden thread pulling him toward the small healer's cottage at the edge of Pack territory where Arwen had been sequestered under guard. He could feel her emotions filtering through the bond: confusion, fear, and something else. Something like wonder. Occasionally, he caught flashes of her thoughts, fragments that made little sense. Ancient trees with silver leaves. A book bound in strange leather. A woman with eyes like Arwen's, whispering warnings. A knock at his door broke his reverie. He opened it to find Elder Thorn, his face grave in the lamplight. "The council remains divided," the old wolf said without preamble. "Some call for the Omega's banishment. Others insist we must find a way to break the mark. A few believe this is an omen we should heed." Raiden's jaw tightened. "And what do you believe, Elder?" Thorn's weathered face seemed to age further as he sighed. "I believe we face something beyond our understanding. The old texts speak of Omegas differently than we view them today. They were once revered, not reviled. Revered." Raiden scoffed. "They're the weakest designation, are they?" Thorn's eyes narrowed. "Or have we simply forgotten what they truly are?" Before Raiden could respond, a sensation like ice water down his spine made him gasp. Through the bond, he felt Arwen's sudden spike of fear, followed by determination. Something was happening at the healer's cottage. "She's in danger," he growled. Pushing past the elder and breaking into a run, he crossed the pack grounds in minutes, his alpha speed carrying him through the darkness. As he approached the cottage, he saw the guards lying unconscious on the ground. The door hung open, and inside, 3 shadowy figures surrounded Arwen. "The council has decided," one of them said. A wolf Raiden recognized as Lyria's cousin. "The Omega must be cleansed of the mark by any means necessary." Arwen stood in the center of the room, her back straight, her eyes glowing that unnatural silver violet. "You cannot remove what was given by the moon itself," she said, her voice carrying that strange resonance again. One of the attackers lunged forward with a ceremonial dagger bridged, designed to cut through magical bonds. Raiden felt a roar build in his chest, his alpha instincts surging to protect what was his. But before he could intervene, something extraordinary happened. Arwen raised her hand, and the mark on her wrist blazed like a miniature sun. A pulse of energy radiated outward, freezing the attackers in place. The air around her shimmered with power, and for a moment, Raiden could have sworn he saw the silhouette of massive wings spreading from her back. "Leave," she commanded, and the word carried such force that the 3 wolves stumbled backward, their eyes wide with terror. They fled past Raiden without even acknowledging his presence, their faces pale with shock. He stepped into the cottage, feeling the residual energy crackling in the air. "What was that?" he demanded, though the question came out softer than he intended. Arwen turned to him, the glow in her eyes slowly fading back to their natural blue. "I don't know," she whispered. "It's happening more often now since the marking. Power I can't control. Knowledge I shouldn't have." Raiden could feel a pull in his chest, something unnatural twisting around his heart. He approached cautiously, and Arwen's hand brushed his arm. A shock of energy passed between them, making them both gasp. "Your soul, ... she murmured, her eyes widening with understanding, "is bound to mine now." He tried to push her away, but the mark burned hotter, spreading through his veins like liquid fire. Every instinct screamed to fight, to reject this unnatural bond with an Omega, but his wolf within bowed, submitting to her presence in a way that defied everything he knew about pack hierarchy. I can't," Raiden gasped, fighting the overwhelming force that urged him to kneel before her. "This isn't right. I'm the Alpha. You're an Omega," she finished. "But do you even know what that means? What we truly are?" She stepped closer, calm yet terrifying in her newfound confidence. The air around her seemed to bend, reality itself warping slightly in her presence. "You can't fight what was never yours to control," she said softly. "The power inside me ... was never meant to be tamed by an alpha." Lightning arced across the sky outside, illuminating the cottage in stark white flashes. Raiden felt his knees weaken as Arwen lifted her hands to frame his face. Her touch was gentle, but he felt the immense power contained within her, ancient, primal, beyond the understanding of their modern pack structure. "What are you?" he whispered. "I'm what Omegas were before your ancestors feared and diminished us," she answered. "We were the balance to Alpha strength, not through physical power, but through connection to the old magic, to the soul of the world itself." Images flooded Raiden's mind through their bond. Omegas standing beside Alphas as equals, channeling energies to heal the land, to communicate with other species, to see beyond the veil between worlds. He saw great councils where Alphas provided protection and leadership in the physical realm, while Omegas guided the spiritual and magical welfare of the pack. The histories were rewritten, Arwen continued, her voice taking on that chanting quality again. Omegas were bred out, suppressed, hidden away. But the moon remembers what we were meant to be, and tonight it corrected a centuries-old imbalance. Raiden felt his soul quiver as her power washed over him, and yet strangely, protected for the first time in his life. The constant pressure of alpha responsibility felt shared, balanced by a complementary force. "The pack won't accept this," he said, though with less conviction than before. "They will," Arwen replied with quiet certainty, "because they must. Something is coming, something that will require both alpha strength and omega sight to survive." Outside, the storm intensified, wind howling through the trees, as though the elements themselves responded to her awakening power. Through their strengthening bond, Raiden sensed the truth in her words, a darkness approaching, a threat beyond physical strength alone. "Then we face it together," he said, surprising himself with the decision. He took her marked wrist in his hand, feeling the connection between them solidify. "But the pack must know. They must understand." Arwen nodded, her eyes reflecting the lightning outside. "By morning, they will. The council must hear the truth, all of it." As if in response to her words, a howl rose from the direction of the pack grounds, the summons to emergency gathering. The council had made its decision. "They voted for your exile," Raiden said, sensing it through his connection to the pack. Arwen's smile was sad, but determined. "Then, we'll give them something else to consider." After careful consideration of our ancient laws and consultation with neighboring pack elders, Thorn continued, "We have determined that this mark is an abomination against nature. The Omega Arwen has, through means unknown, corrupted the sacred marking ritual." Angry growls rumbled through the hall. A few wolves partially shifted in response to the collective emotion, eyes glowing in the dim light. "The penalty for such interference is exile," Thorn declared, lifting the ceremonial staff. "The Omega will be cast out before dawn, her ties to this pack severed permanently." Lyria's father stood, his powerful frame commanding attention. "Exile is too lenient. The old laws call for harsher punishment when magic is used against an alpha." She attempted to steal what was not hers. Before Thorn could respond, the massive doors of the great hall burst open. A gust of wind extinguished half the torches, plunging the room into partial darkness. Raiden strode in, his alpha presence filling the space like a physical force. Beside him walked Arwen, no longer the shrinking figure the pack was accustomed to seeing. The mark on her wrist glowed visibly through the thin fabric of her sleeve. More shocking was the aura that surrounded her, a silvery light that seemed to bend the shadows around her. Her eyes shimmered with that same forbidden power, and many wolves instinctively stepped back as she passed. The pack's council erupted in chaos. Elders rose from their seats. Warriors moved protectively in front of their families, and shouts of outrage filled the air. Silence. Raiden's alpha command cut through the noise, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority. The hall immediately quieted, though tension vibrated in the air. "Alpha Raiden," Elder Thorn said carefully, "the council has reached its decision. The Omega must be exiled for her interference with the sacred marking." "She did not interfere," Raiden replied, his voice steady. "I've spent the night seeking answers in the oldest texts we possess, guided by memories that came through our bond memories of what this pack once was, before we forgot our true nature." He stepped forward, pulling an ancient scroll from within his cloak. "This text predates our current laws by 5 centuries. It speaks of the true purpose of Omegas within wolf packs, not as lesser beings, but as keepers of magic, balancers to alpha power." "Blasphemy!" Lyria's father shouted. "These are corrupted thoughts she's planted in your mind." Raiden's eyes flashed dangerously. "Challenge my mind again, Beta Kel, and you challenge my fitness as alpha." The threat hung in the air, silencing further outbursts. Raiden unrolled the ancient scroll on the council table. "Our ancestors knew that a pack needed both physical strength and magical insight to thrive. Fowls protected the body of the pack. Omegas protected its spirit. But over generations, fear of magic led to the suppression of Omega abilities. They were bred out, hidden away, diminished until most packs forgot what they truly were." Elder Thorn leaned forward, his weathered fingers tracing the faded symbols on the scroll. "These are the old runes," he murmured, "the language of the first pack." Yes, Arwen spoke for the first time, her voice carrying that strange resonance that made the air itself seem to vibrate. "And they tell of a time when the moon would restore balance, when an alpha and omega would be bound against tradition to face a coming darkness." Whispers spread through the hall. Some of the older wolves exchanged knowing glances, as though half-remembered stories from their childhood suddenly gained new significance. "What darkness?" one of the council members asked, her voice betraying fear, despite her attempt at skepticism. As if in answer, the ground beneath them trembled. A low, distant howl echoed from beyond the pack's territory. Not the call of any wolf, but something older, something wrong. That Arwen said simply, "The Void Wolves approach." Creatures banished centuries ago, when alphas and omegas worked together to seal the breach between worlds. With omegas suppressed, the seals have weakened. The barrier thins. Another tremor shook the hall, stronger this time. Dust fell from the ancient beams overhead. "She speaks truth," a voice called from the back of the hall. The crowd parted to reveal the pack's oldest member, Grandmother Willa, who rarely left her cabin these days. "I remember the stories my grandmother told me of shadow wolves that could not be killed by fang or claw, only by the combined power of alpha strength and omega light." Uncertainty rippled through the gathering. Even Lyria's father seemed less confident in his outrage. Raiden stepped forward, standing tall before his pack. "I am your alpha. I have led you in hunts, protected our borders, maintained our alliances. Now, I ask you to trust me when I say this bond was not a mistake." He turned to Arwen, taking her marked wrist in his hand. The connection between them flared visibly, golden light from his touch, meeting the silver glow of her power. "She is my mate," Raiden declared, his voice ringing with conviction. "No council, no ritual, no law can change that. And together, we will defend this pack against what comes." The ground shook again, and this time a distant crash could be heard, trees falling at the edge of their territory. The threat was no longer theoretical, but immediate and physical. Arwen stepped forward, raising her hand. The forbidden power surged from her like a tidal wave, washing over the assembled wolves. But instead of harm, they felt strength flowing into them, awakening something long dormant in their blood. Shadows bent around her, walls cracked with the force of her unleashed power, and a silver glow encircled both her and Raiden. "This bond was never a mistake," Arwen said, eyes blazing with unrestrained power. "It is a warning, and together we will rewrite destiny." Elder Thorn was the first to kneel, followed by Grandmother Willa. One by one, the pack members dropped to one knee, recognizing something ancient and true in the pair before them. Even Lyria, after a moment's hesitation, bowed her head in acceptance. Only Lyria's father remained standing, his face contorted with rage and fear. "This goes against everything we are." "No," Raiden replied calmly. "It returns us to what we were always meant to be. Another crash sounded, closer now. The howls of the void wolves echoed through the night, chilling the blood of every wolf present. "We have no time for division," Arwen said, her voice carrying authority that belied her former status. "Those who stand with us prepare for battle. Those who cannot accept this change may seek shelter in the sacred caves." Raiden finally understood. The Omega the world tried to hide was the one who would change everything. Even him. His perception of strength, of leadership, of what it meant to be Alpha, transformed by the quiet healer, who now stood as his equal. Dawn broke over the packlands in shades of crimson and shadow. At the forest edge, reality itself had torn a jagged rift, pulsing with negative light, swallowing, rather than reflecting the morning sun. The pack assembled at Raiden's command, warriors in front, those with young children positioned safely behind in the great hall. Every able-bodied wolf stood ready, though fear was evident in their tense postures. Raiden and Arwen stood at the forefront, their bond now a visible aurora of gold and silver light connecting them. Through the night, Arwen had shared ancient memories of previous battles, techniques for fighting creatures that existed half in this world and half in shadow. "They cannot be killed by conventional means," she explained. "Claws and fangs will slow them but not destroy them. They must be forced back through the rift, and then the tear must be sealed." "And how do we seal a tear, in reality?" asked Korra, one of the pack's strongest fighters. In answer, Arwen held up her marked wrist. "With the combined power of Alpha and Omega, the balance that was always meant to protect our kind." The first of the Void Wolves emerged, massive creatures with the general shape of wolves, but wrong in every detail. Their fur absorbed light. Their eyes were empty sockets that somehow still saw. Their movements were jerky, yet impossibly fast, as though they skipped frames of reality. "Hold the line," Raiden commanded, his alpha voice, strengthening every wolf present. "Work in pairs. Do not let them isolate you." The pack shifted as one, their wolf forms emerging in a cascade of cracking bones and stretching muscle. Raiden's wolf stood largest, black as midnight, with amber eyes that glowed with power. Beside him, Arwen's transformation revealed something unexpected. Her wolf was smaller but radiated silver light, her fur almost translucent at the edges, as though she existed partially in another realm. The Void Wolves charged. The battle erupted in snarls and the sickening sound of teeth meeting shadow flesh. These creatures shrugged off wounds that should have been fatal, regenerating almost instantly. Through their bond, Raiden and Arwen moved in perfect synchronization. When he attacked physically, she channeled energy through their connection, making his strikes burn with golden fire that the Void Wolves could not simply absorb. When creatures surrounded her, his strength flowed into her smaller form, allowing her to fight with the power of an alpha. But for every shadow wolf they forced back, to more emerged. The pack began to tire, injuries mounting as the relentless enemies pressed forward. "We cannot win this through combat alone." Arwen's voice came through their bond. "We must seal the rift." Together, they broke from the main battle, charging directly toward the pulsing tier. Void Wolves moved to intercept them, but the pack rallied, creating a corridor through which their Alpha and his Omega mate could pass. At the edge of the rift, the wrongness hit them, physically a sensation of reality itself, rejecting their presence. The void beyond was not darkness, but nothingness, a complete absence that threatened to unmake anything it touched. Arwen placed her marked wrist against Raiden's chest, directly over his heart. "Your strength, my sight," she said, her eyes shifting to brilliant Violetziver. "Together, we bridge worlds." Power surged between them, their individual energies amplifying each other. The mark on her wrist expanded, its pattern flowing across both their bodies until they were covered in glowing ancient language of binding and sealing. The Void Wolves sensed the building power and abandoned their attacks on the pack, converging on the pair in a wave of shadow and teeth. But they could not penetrate the sphere of light that now surrounded Raiden and Arwen. by blood and bond. They spoke in unison, their voices merging into something greater than either alone. By Alpha strength and Omega sight, we command the worlds to separate. The light between them condensed, then exploded outward in a shockwave that knocked every wolf to the ground. The rift shuddered, its edges beginning to knit together as the void wolves were pulled back toward it, howling in rage. One by one, the shadow creatures were dragged back through the tear, until only the largest remained, an enormous beast, with antlers of shadow and eyes that held malevolent intelligence. "This is not over, balanced ones." It spoke directly into their minds, its voice like ice cracking. "The old ways return, the barriers weaken, we will meet again." With those words, it too was pulled through the closing rift. Reality sealed itself with a sound like thunder, leaving behind only scorched earth where the tear had been. Silence fell over the battlefield. Injured, wolves limped toward each other, checking on packmate. Raiden and Arwen stood motionless at the center of a perfect circle of untouched grass, the only spot not marred by battle. The light surrounding them faded, though their bond remained visibly a thin thread, connecting them heart to heart. They shifted back to human form, exhaustion evident in their faces, but also a new understanding. "The old texts spoke true," he said, his voice carrying across the clearing. "When Alpha and Omega stand as equals, the pack is strongest." We had forgotten, but the moon remembered. One by one, the pack members knelt, acknowledging not just their Alpha, but the new balance of power he and Arwen represented. Raiden took Arwen's hand, the mark on her wrist pulsing in time with his heartbeat. "The Void Wolf was right about one thing," he said quietly. "This isn't over. The old ways are returning, both the dangers and the strengths." Arwen nodded, her eyes returning to their natural blue, though flecks of silver remained. "Then we will be ready, not just us, but all packs. The knowledge must spread. Omegas must be recognized for what they truly are." "And what are we?" asked a young girl from the edge of the gathering, her eyes holding a familiar shimmer that marked her as a potential Omega. Arwen smiled, kneeling to meet the child's gaze. "We are the balance." As the pack began healing and rebuilding, Raiden watched his mat, the quiet Omega, who had changed everything. Through their bond, he felt her certainty that this was just the beginning of a new era for their kind. The mark that had seemed a mistake now shone as a beacon of hope, a reminder that sometimes fate knew better than tradition, and that true strength came not from dominance, but from balance. In the sky above, the moon hung faintly visible, even in daylight, as though watching over the pack it had guided back to ancient truth. The Omega with the forbidden power had indeed claimed an Alpha soul, not to control it, but to complete it, and together they would rewrite destiny.